Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani here. Today we're going to be doing a follow-up video on perimenopause. We're going to be diving into the root underlying causes. What is it? What those symptoms are and what we can do about it to help. So we're going to be adding a live Q&A element to this video as well, which is really great. So off the bat, perimenopause is essentially typically it may start in the late or the early 40s, late 30s. It's typically early menopausal symptoms that may start while you're still cycling. So officially, perimenopause ends when you have not had a cycle for 12 months. So 12 cycles in a row, no period. All right. So that's number one. Now, you may have symptoms leading up to that for years. Now, the patients that I work with, we allow their menopausal symptoms to be non existent, where it's like, hey, they're cycling, they're cycling, they're cycling. Oh, they're not that big of a deal. And then they transition into menopause 12 months after. So a lot of times it's these menopausal like symptoms that may happen in between menopause. It's going to be the hot flashes. It's going to be mood issues. It could be potential hair loss. It could be vaginal dryness. It could be mood stuff. It could be skin stuff as well. Obviously, hormonal related issues, skipping cycles. Those type of hormonal things are going to be connected to perimenopause. And we're going to see that in our early 40s. You could even see it in your late 30s. It's hard because I see a lot of females that have a lot of hormonal imbalances, a lot of cycling issues. And is it perimenopause? Or are their hormones just way out of balance? Because typically you start to see this diminished ovarian reserve that's associated with perimenopause and typically lower levels of hormones, right? Lower levels of progesterone, lower levels of estrogen. And we may even see estrogen dominance with low hormones too, where that estrogen drops out a little bit less than the progesterone drops out. So that relative ratio of progesterone to estrogen is still skewed in favor of estrogen, even though those hormones are low. So on that side of the fence, we may see women that have cycling hormonal issues that happen more throughout the month. That may be a good idea that this is more perimenopausal. Typically more PMS issues are happening that couple of days to a week or so after the period. I'm sorry, before the period. And then some women, that may even happen right around ovulation, that whole 2 weeks after ovulation up until the period. It's very possible. So in general, we kind of draw a line. We see a lot of women that they're cycling women, they have a lot of PMS hormonal issues. And then as they get into their later 30s, early 40s, they start to have some of these early menopausal symptoms I mentioned earlier. And that's important to look at. So we want to get these symptoms stable so we sail into menopause, we hit the ground running. So what are some of the big stressors that may cause that? It could be blood sugar issues. The more your blood sugar fluctuates up and down, creates cortisol to help buffer the ebbs and flows. We also create insulin on the way up, and that can create hormonal issues. It can increase testosterone, which can throw off gonadotrophic release and hormone, which can affect FSH and LH signaling. That's number one. Inflammation can affect cortisol as well, because cortisol is going to be responding to inflammatory foods, stress, emotions, and that can cause progesterone to go downstream to cortisol and make more stress hormone. Can also cause your bodies to make more adrenaline to compensate for that stress too. Adrenaline and cortisol are intimately connected, but when you're making more adrenaline, you're going to be stealing dopamine to make it. So when you're stealing dopamine to make it, you could have more sweet cravings, inability to focus, just feel not quite like yourself. Dopamine's that I love you chemical. It's also that focus chemical. So we may have focus issues and mood issues to boot because of that. Really important. Next on top of that is just not eating enough good fats and proteins and cholesterol. If we don't digest cholesterol and good fats and proteins, which they tend to be connected, right? Proteins, fats, and cholesterol tend to be connected, especially from animal sources, right? That's the major place you're going to get cholesterol. And those are building blocks for your hormones. So if we're not eating those, or if we have poor digestion when we can't break down, assimilate those, whether it's low hydrochloric acid levels, which then causes low enzyme, which then causes low bile salt levels, that's a big concern. So we talked about the blood sugar, we talked about inflammation, we talked about protein and fat, we talked about digestion, The next thing I think would be exogenous hormones in the environment, whether it's from pesticides or plastics, or Roundup or glyphosate or GMO byproducts as well, or just the growth hormones given to the conventionally raised animals to fatten them up. Those all get passed down to you. And a lot of them are xenoestrogens. They're foreign estrogens, and that can throw off your hormones. It can increase that estrogen dominant cascade. Very possible. So how do we affect this? How do we change this? Well, we improve nutrition. We decrease inflammation with a really good paleo template. We work on improving good cholesterol and fat in the diet from healthy animal sources. We work on testing and assessing the adrenal glands and supporting them correspondingly. High cortisol, low cortisol, aberrant cortisol. There's different means to address all of those. So it depends on what's come back. Number two, three, we may look at a month-long cycle, especially if fertility is a goal. We may look at a month-long cycle to see how the cycle's looking, make sure the follicular and luteal phase are appropriate lengths, make sure we're actually ovulating too. We'll also look at the gut to run deeper tests to make sure there's not an infection that's affecting the gut on top of that. And we may use specific herbs to help with the LH and the FSH signaling. Part of the reason why hot flashes occur is because those FSH hormones, that upstream pituitary hormone, can cause vasodilation and can increase the hot flashing. So the reason why those pituitary hormones are going up is because the body is trying to yell downstream to the ovaries, make more hormones. So if we can help that signaling, if we can improve that communication with various herbs, that'll help. We may use glandular tissue. We may use maca. We may use chaste tree. We may use a lot of other various herbs and adaptogens to help with that. We may use ashwagandha. It really depends. There's specific types of maca that we'll use just for perimenopausal patients. We have specific phenotypes for cycling women, perimenopausal women. That could be early 40s, in between that 12 months of not having a period, and then even our menopausal women. So we have a couple of different options with that. So in general, we kind of reviewed the big five things, which are going to be adrenal, blood sugar, inflammation, and then hormones in the environment, and then poor digestion and toxins in the environment. Those are going to be the big five that we addressed here today. I'm going to open it up for a live Q&A here in just a sec. See here. Topic is going to be perimenopause. I'm going to make sure that's clear here. Perimenopause and female hormones is the topic, just so everyone's clear. Cool. Nicole writes in, good morning. Any suggestions on how to increase milk supply while breastfeeding? So number one, you can do is there's a couple of supplements that are out there that have really good things in there that can help. Like fenugreek is a big one. There's also curcumin is really good. My wife used my liposomal curcumin to help increase her blood supply. I mean, as long as you're not gluten sensitive, you could do some gluten-free oats. Oats really do help with the breast milk supply. I may have said blood supply, but breast milk supply. So oats, gluten-free oats can be helpful. And then obviously there are some really good formulas that I have, whether it's hops that are in there, whether it's fenugreek, some really good compounds that are there in higher doses that can be used to help. Also, improving high quality carbs can be helpful too. Tiana writes in, I'm on antidepressants for the last 3 years, was diagnosed with celiac, on Graves, and giving birth. I have spotting for 7 days before my period. What should I do? So the first thing is, if you have celiac and Graves, you got to get the autoimmunity under control. And a lot of the autoimmune issues are going to happen at the root from gut permeability problems. So gut permeability can definitely be a concern to all this. We got to look at the gut. And then, of course, you got to get on an autoimmune template if you're not there yet. And you got to be working with a good functional medicine doc that's monitoring your Graves. Anytime I hear Graves, I get concerned. And with celiac too, if it's that bad where you have celiac, you got to have that looked at deeper and to make sure that you're supporting the gut healing. Because just going gluten-free and eating rice and corn and oats may not be enough. Okay, excellent. Let's see here. Any other questions? Alma writes in, Dr. J, can central nervous system retinopathy be reversed? What supplements do you recommend? So when you say retinopathy, I'm guessing inflammation in the eye. That's what I'm hearing. So the first thing, anytime I see inflammation, especially with the eyes have really tiny little small blood vessels going to them. So when we have high levels of blood sugar, high levels of insulin, that creates advanced glycation end products called AGEs. And that can create a lot of oxidative stress in those small little blood vessels, and it can decrease circulation to the eye. So, of course, the first thing is making sure we improve blood flow. We do it through cutting inflammation out in our diet. We can add in supplements that help, like fish oil, like lutein, like bilberry. We can do things like ginkgo to help improve blood flow. We can do things like grapeseed extract and various antioxidants to help with the eye health too. Resveratrol is also very good on top of that. Another thing I see is, I have a lot of women that have a lot of PMS or just that last 2 weeks of their cycles. Hell, why is that? A lot of times that's the luteal phase where progesterone's dropping out. And if we have progesterone drop out too soon, or it's like kind of like it drops out and then kind of pitters back and forth, these up and down swings can really cause problems. So by one, making sure progesterone's high enough, right? Making sure it's not low, making sure it's high enough, and then make sure we have a good arch, meaning we're not dropping down too soon. We start dropping like around day 27, 28, 26. That way it comes down faster and it comes down later in the cycle. That's going to make a big difference. And a lot of times that progesterone's petering out is because the body's in that chronic state of stress and is using progesterone as a building block to make more stress hormone. The body's pretty amazing where it can prioritize stress hormones over fertility hormones. And it makes sense, right? Because if you can't get to tomorrow, if you can't survive now and get to tomorrow, what's the point of being around in 9 months to have a child? It doesn't make sense. It's not going to happen. So the body's always trying to get to a baseline level of stress before fertility kicks in. So we're trying to basically decrease all stress signaling to the body, which then allows the body to reprioritize towards fertility and healthy hormones. Someone that's healthy should be fertile. That's kind of a natural byproduct of being healthy, is fertility should happen along with it. Now, the only exception is now you're menopausal. Great. You should still be in menopause without very little symptoms at all. Hot flashes, all those things, sleep, mood, libido, vaginal dryness should not be there. So once you go from perimenopause, where you're a couple of years away, maybe in your early 40s, into actual menopause, where it's been 12 months without a period, we start to lean more on our adrenal glands for those hormone reserves. So it's really important. If that backup battery, you have a storm, right? You have a backup generator in your garage that you're now going to rely on when power's out. That backup generator is low in fuel, whether it's a diesel or gas-powered generator. If you don't have much gas in it, guess what? That generator is not going to be able to compensate for the lack of electricity in your house. So think of a backup generator that's on empty is like your adrenal glands when you go into menopause. Menopause is the storm, right? And the backup generator is on low, so you're not going to be able to utilize it for the purpose of why you got that generator. So we want to put our focus on recharging that generator, which is like recharging the adrenal glands. That's supporting DHEA sulfate levels through nutrition, through cutting inflammation. We may even use bioidentical hormones to act as a crutch to support your body's ability to heal, right? How does a crutch work? The crutch takes stress off of that area so it can heal better. Broken ankle, take stress off of it so that ankle can heal better. Same thing with some of these extra nutrients and or hormone precursors like pregnenolone or DHEA. We may even use progesterone. If a woman's cycling or has if a woman's menopausal or has severe cycling estrogen deficits, we may throw a little bit of estrogen in at certain parts of the cycle. If you're cycling, if you're menopausal, we can just kind of throw it in across the whole month because there's not a aberration of hormones that we have to compensate for. All right, cool. A couple other questions came in. Dr. J, do you ever prescribe doses of progesterone cream above 100 milligrams per day? So in my line, I use a product called Cycle Balance, which is progesterone drops. And I like those because they can get into the bloodstream faster. The progesterone cream can basically saturate the subcutaneous tissue. And if you're a cycling woman, I want to drop out that progesterone maybe on day 27, 28, and I may not be able to. It may pitter in to now day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and that could throw off some of the cycles. So some women do okay with it. It just depends, right? If you're going to do it, doing it in thinner mucosal tissue like the vaginal area may be better because there's less, let's say, sub-Q tissue where it can hang out. But yeah, I mean, 100 milligrams is typically my highest dose that I'll go to, but some women may do better with a higher dose. It just depends on how low your levels are. And I would dose up slowly. I wouldn't just go above that. I would dose, 4 to 10 milligrams at a time, very slowly to watch and see how you do. Autoimmune question from David. How often do you reintroduce new foods after coming off the AIP protocol with eggs? Typically 2 to 3 days. And if we're more sensitive, 2 to 4 days, one food per 2 to 4 days. And we may go a smaller amount on day 1 and just titrate up slowly. Any negative reactions, pull it out. Alma writes in, how to prevent hair loss after hormonal IUD removal. Well, it depends, right? If the IUD is a Mirena IUD, that's going to be a progesterone-based IUD. So I would look at supporting your progesterone levels. I would look at getting your hormones tested. I would probably do some hormonal detoxification support because those levels can be a lot higher than normal. And I would come in there and support the adrenals and support a little bit of progesterone at the right time of your cycle. But you want to see a good functional medicine doc for that. Carol writes in, I just been diagnosed with Addison's disease. What are your thoughts and what should I do? Well, number one, have a conventional endocrinologist make sure they've assessed you. That's number one. But number two, what are you going to do after that? Because a conventional endo may just put you on Cortaf or hydrocortisone and call it a day. So, I mean, number one, if you're going to be doing that, it should be taken correctly during the day. I would probably be using a little bit of pregnenolone as well to support that. That way you don't need as much hydrocortisone, number two. Number three, I'd be using adrenal glandular tissue, and I'd be supplementing additional nutrients like minerals, because when your cortisol is that low, that autoimmune destruction to your adrenal glands has probably affected the parts of the gland that also produce mineral corticoids. So your ability to hold on to extra minerals may be thwarted. So good quality mineral support, Redmond's real salt, potassium, magnesium, make sure extra minerals are there. And I'd be using adaptogens as well to make sure that we are managing that stress response appropriately. Okay, excellent. All right, any other questions, guys? And what can be done about gallbladder polyps? I'm not sure about gallbladder polyps, but anytime I hear polyps, I think hyperinsulinism, high levels of insulin, high levels of inflammation. So any kind of polyp, I am working on getting the blood sugar under control, which will help the insulin, because insulin responds to high levels of blood sugar to bring it into the cell, number one. Number two, get the inflammatory foods out. Inflammation can cause more cortisol to respond to the inflammation. Cortisol can then mobilize more glucose from the muscles and the liver. And that can increase insulin as well. You can have a blood sugar insulin response from inflammation. You don't have to be eating carbs and excess sugar to have an insulin response. Stress can do it as well. And it does it by breaking down protein from the muscles, and that gets converted to sugar as well. So getting the stress response under control can make a huge difference. And obviously, gluten sensitivity is a big component of the food inflammatory response. I hope that helps. So when I see my female patients like this, we're going to do testing typically in the luteal phase to kind of get a window of where their day 19 to 23 or 24 sits. I want to look at their progesterone. I want to look at how they're metabolizing estrogen. If we're not metabolizing estrogen well, that can tell us that, you may be reaccumulating a lot of that estrogen. So we want to make sure those detoxification pathways are doing well so we can excrete those chemicals. Also, with bad gut bacteria, we increase an enzyme called beta glucuronidase. That enzyme basically takes bacteria, it takes hormones that are being escorted out of the body, right? These hormones have handcuffs on them. They're being escorted out by security. It basically takes the handcuffs off of them and allows them to go back to where they were wreaking havoc. So having good, healthy levels of bacteria, meaning we don't have a dysbiosis, high levels of bad, low levels of good, that can help us to excrete and conjugate our hormones appropriately versus deconjugate. Deconjugate is essentially take the handcuffs off the hormones and allow them to go back into the general population. That's important. A lot of people aren't, it's hard to wrap your heads around, how does my gut affect my hormones? And a lot of conventional minded MDs, this kind of goes over their head. They're just so focused on what supplement, what hormone needs to be there, and the digestive part or the food inflammation part kind of goes over their head, or even the infection, right? Is their digestion caused by an infection on top of SIBO or H. pylori or something else like that? So we got to look really deep to make sure the root issue is fully addressed. All right, cool. Any other questions, comments, or concerns here? I may come back later on today, do another video. Take a look at the Thyroid Reset Summit. We are going live next week. I'm also giving away the first 88 pages of my new book called The Thyroid Reset Diet. I'm really excited to have this book come out. I think it's going to share a lot of great info with people and really help people take control of their health, especially their thyroid health. I have an autoimmune thyroid condition myself, so Hashimoto's and thyroid health are just really important to me. They're near and dear to my heart. I think there's a lack of information and support on the conventional medicine side for this. So I really want to help fill in the gaps and make this information more accessible. So thyroidresetsummit.com. Make sure you subscribe. All right, last question here. Can Candida give you adrenal fatigue? I just got a stool test back and got Citrobacter, Staph, Strep, and any adrenal supplements you can recommend. So Candida it can create stress in the gut. Typically how you got the Candida is through excess sugar and inflammation too. So usually there's a bad diet that predisposed to that. So obviously that bad diet is going to be driving adrenal fatigue, or adrenal dysfunction, I like to call it. Also, the poor nutrition is going to be driving it, because high sugar typically means not enough B vitamins and minerals. So that's going to drive it as well. And then the stress in the gut can create more inflammation, which can cause the adrenals to have to work harder. And then, of course, the inflammatory byproducts via mycotoxins and also the chemicals that are released by Candida to cause you to crave more foods that are sugary and sweet can also kind of create this self-destructive pattern. Bridget writes in, Jay, my sister was diagnosed with lupus. She went on a fasting day with just C in the water. She did really well the day after. Next day, had celery, cilantro, and cabbage juice and felt pain. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. The cilantro is a natural chelator, a natural detoxifier. So it could have been she was pulling out toxins. But if she went on a fast and felt good initially, that tells me that there's some food allergens that could be causing the problem. So definitely, if lupus is a concern, I would definitely start with an autoimmune template from there, and she should work with a really good functional medicine doctor that can work through it, because the guts and the hormones and the mitochondria tend to all be at play, and there's other infections potentially there too. Jay, recently, actress Selma Blair made it public that she has MS. Do you deal with any patients with MS? Also, does it surprise you that many celebs don't seek natural treatments instead of conventional? It's hard to say. I think I've seen people on the celebrity famous side before, and a lot of them, they just kind of want to be, private. They want to have their personal life. They don't want to make what they're doing privately a spectacle. I mean, imagine, people had the camera on you all the time. Would you want to voice everything that you were doing? I mean, people want a little bit of privacy. So in general, I have seen patients with MS and I've had good results. It just depends on how long it's been going on for, because if there's been 10 or 20 years of destruction to parts of the brain, well, our first goal is just to stop the destruction, right? Stop the destruction, stop that downward slide. So how much we can recover after that downward slide, it's hard to say. We have to fix the gut, fix the intestinal barrier, get rid of infections, fix the food that could be driving molecular mimicry, and then we can do extra things to help improve blood flow and inflammation in the brain, maybe hyperbaric oxygen therapy to improve brain lesions that may not be, getting enough support because of the inflammation up there. So it really depends. You're welcome, Bridget. Lisa writes in, if taking GI herbs, I feel a reaction like nausea and jumpy stomach, even taken with food. Does that mean I need binders? Potentially. I would also, if you're a patient, Lisa, you should be following my supplement or die-off reaction guide and titrating those herbs in one at a time. And you may just have to go a little bit slower, but ginger tea can be great. And activated charcoal taken away from food 2 to 3 hours after sups, 1 to 1 hour before. Didi writes in, just started testosterone cream this morning. Huge change in my energy and brain function. So I'm guessing, Didi, you are a female. So if that's the case, just be careful with that. Make sure you're testing your levels. Try to keep it within the functional range so you don't go too high, number one. And that's good. I'd want to look at your adrenals, make sure your adrenals are good too, because you're going to get some of those hormones from there too. If you're a guy, then we just got to make sure we're monitoring that. I'm not sure. All right, y'all. Hope this information was super helpful. Give me a like, give me a share, give me a thumbs up. thyroidresetsummit.com next week. You guys have a phenomenal weekend. I may be back today. I'm jumping on a podcast here in an hour for someone else's summit that's coming up, the Do-It-Yourself Detox Summit, which will be coming up in the next month. So really excited for that. You guys have a phenomenal day, phenomenal weekend, and we'll talk soon. Take care.